The laughter didn't sound cruel at first. It sounded practiced, the kind that rolls out of a room because people sense they're supposed to join in, not because the joke was that good. "She's just kidding, someone near me," whispered. Then the bride leaned into the microphone, smiling, and said it clearly, too clearly to misunderstand. "He's just a freeloading stepfather." The room burst into laughter, and in that noise I saw my wife laugh too. Not loudly, not proudly, just enough to let me know she wouldn't stop it. That was the moment I understood I wasn't invisible. I was convenient. The venue looked exactly like the brochure promised. Soft gold lighting, white tablecloths pressed so flat they reflected the chandelier centerpieces, arranged with the kind of symmetry that costs extra and never smells like real flowers. The band had just finished their sound check, tight, professional, confident. Everything about the night said nothing will go wrong. I stood near the back of the room, not because anyone asked me to, but because I'd learned over the years where I fit most comfortably, close enough to help if something broke, far enough not to be noticed when things went well. The speeches began the way they always do. Thank yous, memories, inside jokes that make half the room smile politely while the other half leans forward, eager to be included in something. My wife's daughter stepped up last. She held the microphone with ease. She'd always been good at that, being watched. She smiled at the crowd, waited for the room to settle, and began talking about love, family, and how supported she'd always felt. Phones rose quietly from tables. A few guests shifted their chairs to get a better angle. I watched my wife as her daughter spoke. She looked proud, tense, but proud, like someone trying very hard to believe this night would finally go smoothly. And of course, the bride said, pausing just long enough to invite attention, "None of this would have happened without my family." Applause. "My dad," she continued, "my grandmother, everyone who's always been there." Another pause, longer this time. "And my stepfather," she added, tilting her head slightly in my direction. "He helped too, in his own way." A ripple of laughter passed through the room, not loud yet. Curious. I felt my shoulders tighten, not because of the words, but because of the tone. That familiar mix of sweetness and dismissal, the kind you can't object to without sounding sensitive. She smiled wider. "He's always around," she said, "even when no one's quite sure what he's contributing." Laughter grew louder, more confident. Then she said it. "He's just a freeloading stepfather." The laughter exploded. Not awkward laughter, not nervous laughter, real laughter. The kind that shakes tables and makes people glance around to see who else is enjoying it. Someone clapped. Someone repeated the line under their breath. I stood still. For a moment I thought my hearing had gone strange, that hollow feeling you get when a loud noise suddenly cuts off blood to your head. But the laughter kept going, and with it came something sharper. Permission. I didn't look away immediately. I wanted to know who was laughing, who was comfortable enough with the idea of me as a joke to enjoy it fully. That's when I saw my wife. She was laughing too, not loudly, not cruy, but openly enough that there was no mistaking it. A quick smile, a breathy laugh, the kind people use to keep things light when they don't want to challenge the room. I waited for her eyes to meet mine. They didn't. The bride kept talking, riding the wave. Another comment, another chuckle. I couldn't tell you what she said next. My attention had narrowed to something quieter, heavier. I'd felt this before. Not exactly like this, but close enough. Moments when conversations paused and someone said, "Don't worry, he'll cover it." Times when my wife waved off concerns with, "He won't say no." Invoices that landed in my inbox without discussion. upgrades that appeared on contracts already signed. I told myself those were small things, temporary things, the cost of keeping peace. Standing there listening to the room laugh, I realized what those moments had been building toward this. I didn't walk out. I didn't interrupt. I didn't reach for the microphone and demand respect. That kind of scene only works if the room wants to hear you. I stepped away. Behind the main hall, past a heavy curtain no one noticed anymore, was the service corridor. The air changed immediately cooler, quieter, smelling faintly of cables and stale coffee. The sound of the laughter dulled like a door closing on a memory. The event manager looked up when he saw me. He was holding a tablet headset resting around his neck, eyes alert in the way of someone whose job is to solve problems before they become visible. "Sir," he said, "everything okay?" "Yes," I replied. My voice surprised me. Calm, even. "I need to adjust a few things." He nodded automatically. "Of course. What kind of adjustments?" "I want to keep the ceremony and dinner as planned," I said, "but I need to pause the premium add-on scheduled for later." He frowned slightly. "You mean the extended open bar, the late-night snacks, the upgraded lighting sequence?" "Yes." He glanced down at the tablet. I watched his eyes scan the screen, moving from line to line until they stopped. "My name, I see," he said carefully. "May I ask?" "I authorize those upgrades," I said. "I'm asking that they end after the current segment. No announcements, no disruptions." He hesitated, just long enough to understand the weight of the request. "We can downgrade to the standard package," he said. "Guests may notice." "That's fine," I replied. "Please keep it discreet." He nodded. "Understood." I turned to leave, then stopped. "And please remove my name from any acknowledgments or sponsor listings." That made him look up. "Yes, sir," he said. I walked back toward the hall as the applause surged again. My phone vibrated in my pocket, an authorization alert from my bank, waiting for approval for another late-night expense. I didn't open it. I already knew the answer. When I stepped back into the room, the bride was still smiling, the band was still playing, and my wife was still seated where I'd left her. Everything looked the same, but beneath the music and the lights, the night had already begun to change. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to be noticed. I didn't return to my seat right away. From the edge of the room, I watched the wedding keep moving the way events do when no one has announced that anything is wrong. Plates were cleared, glasses were refilled. The band eased into another song. Familiar, safe. To anyone walking in late, it would have looked like a success. That's how money works when it's doing its job. It keeps the illusion intact. People hear the word freeloader and imagine someone lazy, careless, living off others without shame. What they don't picture is the quieter version, the person who pays consistently, silently, and becomes invisible because of it. When support is steady enough, people stop seeing it as support at all. They start seeing it as background noise. That had been my role. I've never been flashy. I work in operations for a logistics firm, warehouses, contracts, routing schedules, cost controls. My job is to make sure things don't fall apart, and when they don't, no one thinks about why. I learned early that reliability doesn't get applause, it gets expectation. When I married my wife, I didn't think of myself as stepping into someone else's family. I thought we were building one. She had history, a daughter from her first marriage, a mother who had opinions about how things should be done. I respected all of that. What I didn't expect was how quickly helping would turn into handling it. It started small, a deposit here, a shortfall there. "Can you just cover this for now? I'll pay you back next month. It's easier if it goes through you. I never said no. Not because I was afraid to, because at the time it felt reasonable, temporary, a way to keep things moving. When the engagement was announced, the request multiplied. Venues were toured, budgets were drafted and redrafted, each version a little higher than the last. The bride had a vision. Everyone said that word as if it explained everything. She's only getting married once, my wife told me, spreading brochures across the kitchen table. She deserves something special. The venue alone was more than I'd expected. Then came the add-ons. Live band instead of DJ, premium open bar instead of standard, custom lighting, an LED dance floor to make it feel unforgettable. Each time there was a pause. Not awkward, anticipatory, a moment where everyone waited to see if the numbers would resolve themselves. They did. I covered deposits. I approved invoices. Over 8 months, I transferred more than $85,000 for upgrades alone. Not because anyone demanded it outright, because the alternative was conflict, and conflict had been framed as the real problem. I kept records. That wasn't suspicion, it was habit. Contracts saved to a folder. Payment confirmations archived. Notes attached to invoices so I'd remember what they were for. When you work operations, documentation is how you sleep at night. Standing there now, watching guests enjoy a celebration I'd financed without being acknowledged. I felt a strange calm settle in my chest. Not anger, recognition. The first downgrade happened quietly. At the bar, a bartender leaned toward a guest and shook his head apologetically. The guest frowned, glanced at the menu, and ordered something else. A small disappointment barely worth commenting on. The LED floors shifted from dynamic patterns to a static glow. Still pretty, just less impressive. The band finished a song and paused longer than before. The next track started, but it wasn't the one printed on the program. People noticed. They didn't know what they were noticing, only that the night felt slightly less extravagant than it had 10 minutes earlier. Conversation shifted. A few guests checked their phones. Someone near the back whispered, "Did they change something?" My wife turned in her chair, scanning the room. She caught my eye this time. She stood and walked toward me, her expression tight but controlled. "What's happening?" she asked softly. I paused. "The premium packages scheduled for later," I said. Her brow furrowed. "You can't just do that." "I can," I replied. "They're under my name." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "This isn't the time. We'll talk after." "We're talking now," I said evenly. Her phone buzzed. She looked down, then back up at me. "The coordinator says there's an issue with the upgrades." "There isn't," I said. "They're just ending as planned." She stared at me as if trying to reconcile two versions of me, the one she knew and the one standing in front of her. "You're going to make this worse." "I'm not making anything," I said. "I'm letting it show." Behind her, the room continued to adjust. Not collapse, adjust, like a machine losing power in stages. The bride laughed too loudly at something. The MC said the sound didn't land the way it had earlier. A few guests joined in out of politeness. Others didn't. The MC leaned toward the bride and whispered something. She nodded, then frowned. I felt my phone vibrate again. Another authorization request for extended bar hours. I declined it. My wife's shoulders dropped slightly. "Why now?" she asked. "Why tonight?" I looked past her at the stage, at the microphone that had turned me into a punchline. "Because tonight," I said, "the joke stopped being quiet." She didn't answer. And in the space where her response should have been, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not anger, not cruelty, fear. Fear that the system we'd built on my silence was starting to fail. The room didn't break, it shifted. That's how you know something real is happening, not with a crash, but with a misalignment. The music kept playing, but it felt thinner, like the bass had been dialed back. The lights still glowed warm, but flatter, less theatrical. People spoke in the same tones, yet leaned closer when they did, as if the air itself had learned to listen. I stayed near the sidewall, close enough to see details most people miss when they're distracted by celebration. Years in operations train you for this. You don't wait for alarms, you watch the margins. At the bar, the top-shelf bottles were gone from the display, replaced by labels no one takes pictures of. A man in a gray suit studied his glass, frowned and said, "Huh," like he wasn't sure whether to complain or accept it. He chose acceptance. The LED dance floor dimmed again, still on but now static. Pretty if you didn't know what it had been 10 minutes earlier. The band finished a song and didn't roll straight into the next. The pause stretched. Applause came late and died early. Guests began to notice each other noticing. My wife stood where I'd left her phone pressed to her ear, her body angled away from me. She nodded several times, murmured short responses, then ended the call and walked toward me with purpose. "What did you tell them?" she asked. "I asked them to let the night continue without the premium upgrades," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You made it sound like a favor. I made it sound accurate." She glanced around, scanning faces. "People are asking questions. They're allowed to." "This is humiliating," she said. I didn't argue the word. "It doesn't feel good," I agreed. "That's not the same thing." Her mother appeared at her side as if summoned by discomfort. She took in the room with a practiced eye assessing damage. "This is not how family handles things," she said to me. Not angry, authoritative. "I'm handling my part," I replied. She sniffed. "You married into this family. You knew what was expected." I met her gaze. I knew what I was willing to give. I didn't agree to be ridiculed for it. She waved a hand dismissively. "It was a joke." Then it should have been easy to stop. She opened her mouth and closed it. Not because she didn't have a response, but because people nearby had begun to watch. The bride laughed again near the stage, a little too loudly as the MC tried to steer the program forward. The laughter didn't spread this time. It landed and stayed put. A guest near the front leaned toward another and whispered, "What's going on?" Another shrugged. "Something with the budget, I think." The word budget moved through the room faster than laughter ever had. My wife lowered her voice. "You're making people uncomfortable." "I didn't start that." She flinched, not dramatically, but enough to register. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, something real. Instead, she straightened. "We'll talk about this later." I nodded. "That's what you said before." Her mother stepped closer. "You could have waited," she said. "You could have handled this privately." "Privacy is what made it possible," I said. The MC leaned toward the bride again, whispering urgently. She frowned, irritation flashing across her face. She nodded once, then turned back to the microphone. "Looks like we're having a small technical adjustment," she said brightly. "Nothing to worry about." The room didn't buy it. No one booed, no one laughed, but people shifted in their seats the way they do when a plane hits turbulence. And the captain insists everything's fine. That's when the MC made his mistake. He turned slightly away from the microphone and said, thinking it was off, "What about the sponsor changes?" The word sponsor slipped through the speakers like a dropped plate. Not loud, not announced, just enough. Heads turned. The bride froze for half a second too long. Then she laughed and waved it off. "You know how events are," she said. "Always something. But the room had crossed a threshold. People began doing math, not numbers, relationships. My wife's ex-husband stared at his napkin. My mother-in-law's smile tightened. A few guests glanced at me, then quickly looked away as if they'd caught themselves staring. I felt my phone vibrate again. Another request queued for later. I didn't decline it this time. I let it sit. The bride leaned toward her father, whispering sharply. He shrugged helplessly. She turned back toward the stage, her smile now brittle. That's when the chair scraped. The sound cut through the murmurs cleanly. The groom stood up. He hadn't spoken much all night. Polite smiles, short thank yous, the kind of man who listens more than he fills space. He looked steady now, not angry, not panicked. He stepped onto the stage and took the microphone from the stand. "Can I ask something?" he said. The room went quiet. Not instantly, gradually, like a dimmer sliding down. He looked around once, then fixed his eyes on the bride. "I've heard a lot tonight about family," he said, "about who contributes and who doesn't." He paused, choosing his words. "If he's just a freeloader," the groom continued, his voice calm, "then I'm confused." He gestured lightly toward the band, the floor, the bar. "Who paid for the live band?" he asked. "The LED floor, the premium open bar we've been using." No accusation, no theatrics, just questions. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of realizations clicking into place. No one answered. The bride's smile faded. My wife's mother inhaled sharply. My wife looked at me, then back at the groom, something like doubt flickering across her face for the first time. The groom waited, and in that waiting the groom did the math for him. No one rushed to answer him. The groom stood there with the microphone resting lightly in his hand, not raised, not lowered. He wasn't challenging anyone. He was waiting. The kind of waiting that makes people aware of their own breathing. A server stopped beside the dance floor tray, balanced against her hip, eyes flicking between the stage and the nearest table. The band members stood still, instruments lowered. Somewhere near the bar, a glass clinked softly against another, and then went quiet. The bride laughed first. It came out thin, too quick. "Okay," she said, waving a hand. "That's not funny." The groom turned toward her, not sharply, not angrily, just enough to make it clear the question wasn't meant to entertain. "I'm not joking," he said. Her smile faltered. "You're doing this right now?" He nodded once. "Yes." A low murmur rolled through the room. Guests leaned toward one another, whispers passing between them in fragments. This wasn't spectacle anymore. It was something heavier, something that asked to be understood. My wife stood beside her mother, arms crossed tightly now. Her eyes moved between the groom and the bride, then briefly to me. For the first time that night, she didn't look certain. The groom lifted the microphone slightly. "I need to understand something before we go any further," he said. His voice stayed calm, even because I've heard this kind of thing before. The bride frowned. "Heard what?" He didn't answer her immediately. "Over the last few months," he said, "I've heard phrases that didn't sit right with me." He paused, searching for accuracy rather than drama. "Don't worry, he'll handle it. He won't say no. It's easier if it goes through him." My wife's mother shifted her weight. My wife's ex-husband stared down at his hands. The groom looked at the bride again. At first, I thought I was misunderstanding, that maybe this was just how families talk. The bride crossed her arms. "It is." "Maybe," he said, "but then tonight you called him a freeloader." A few people inhaled sharply. The word repeated now without laughter sounded different. "That was a joke," she snapped. "You know that." He nodded slowly. That's what I told myself too, until I started noticing where the bills were going. The room grew still again. I didn't sign the contract with the band, the groom said. I didn't approve the lighting upgrades. I didn't authorize the premium bar package. He turned slightly, addressing the room now, but someone did. My wife took a step forward. "This isn't appropriate," she said, her voice tight. "We can talk about this later." The groom shook his head. Later is how small things stack up. He looked at me then, not accusing, not grateful, curious. "Sir," he said, "did you pay for these upgrades?" I felt every eye turn. "Yes," I said. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. The bride spun toward me. "You don't get to say that like it means something." "I'm not adding meaning," I replied. "I'm answering a question." The groom nodded. "Thank you." He turned back to the bride. "I need you to do something." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" "Apologize," he said. "Not because someone told you to, because you crossed a line." The bride laughed again, but this time no one joined her. "You want me to apologize to him for a joke?" "Yes." She shook her head. "You're overreacting." The groom's voice stayed steady. "I'm reacting accurately." She looked around, searching for support. "Mom." My wife's mother stepped forward. "Families tease," she said firmly. "He married into this family. He knows how we are." The groom turned to her. "That doesn't make it right." She bristled. "You don't understand." "I understand enough," he said. "I grew up watching small humiliations turn into habits." The bride's face flushed. "So what? You're taking his side now." He met her gaze. "I'm choosing honesty." She scoffed. "Then say it. Say you're choosing him over me." He shook his head. "I'm choosing respect over pretending." Silence fell again. He waited, giving her space to respond. She didn't. Her jaw tightened, her shoulders squared. "I'm not apologizing." The groom closed his eyes briefly, not in anger, in recognition. "Then I can't do this," he said. A gasp rippled through the room, real this time. Not excitement, shock. The bride stared at him. "You're serious?" "Yes, you'd throw everything away over this." He looked around the guests, the decorations, the fading lights. "I'm not throwing anything away," he said. "I'm refusing to build on something that's already cracked." My wife stepped forward again, her voice lower now. "Please," she said, "let's not make this worse." The groom looked at her. "It's already worse. We're just finally naming it." He lowered the microphone and placed it carefully back in its stand. "I'm sorry," he said to his parents, who sat watching quietly. "I won't marry someone who humiliates people and calls it humor." He stepped off the stage. No music followed. No one moved. The bride stood frozen, her mouth opening as if to speak, then closing again. My wife's mother stared ahead, lips pressed thin. My wife looked between them, something like regret flickering across her face. Quick, uncertain, gone, before it could settle. I remained where I was. I hadn't asked him to speak. I hadn't asked him to stop the wedding. All he'd done was ask a question the room could no longer avoid. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about punishment, it was about exposure. The room didn't erupt after the groom stepped off the stage. That's what surprised me most. No shouting, no chaos, just a slow, collective uncertainty, as if everyone had been handed a truth they weren't sure where to put. Conversations resumed in fragments. Chairs shifted. Someone laughed once too loudly, then stopped when no one joined in. The bride stood near the microphone, staring at it like it had betrayed her. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The moment had passed. Whatever came next wouldn't sound convincing. The band didn't restart. They waited. That waiting did more than music ever could. It let the reality settle. I stayed where I was near the sidewall. I didn't approach the bride. I didn't look at my wife. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already found the air. A few guests began to leave their tables, not dramatically, just drifting toward the bar or the exits, phones in hand, sending quiet messages that would turn into stories by morning. My wife came toward me slowly, not angry now, not defensive, tired. "This has gone too far," she said. I shook my head. "It went too far before tonight." She exhaled. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. "I know," I replied. "That's what makes it worse." She frowned. "How?" "Because it means she's been thinking it for a long time." She didn't answer that. Instead, she glanced around the room again. "People are leaving." "Some are," I said. "Others are staying to understand." Her eyes flicked toward the bar where guests now held simpler drinks than toward the darkened LED floor. "They're noticing." "Yes," she swallowed. "You didn't have to do this here." I met her gaze. "I didn't do it to them. I stopped doing it for them." That distinction landed heavier than an argument would have. The event manager approached quietly, stopping at a respectful distance. "Sir," he said, "we've transitioned to the standard package. The late-night catering and extended bar hours are canceled. The staff has been informed." "Thank you," I said. He nodded and moved on. No announcement, no explanation, just consequences unfolding at a pace no one could accuse of being theatrical. My wife closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was something new there. Not rage, not cruelty, doubt. "I didn't think it would come to this," she said softly. I believed her. "That doesn't make it untrue," I replied. Across the room, the bride had finally found her voice. She wasn't shouting. She was pleading, quietly, urgently with the groom near the edge of the hall. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the shape of them. "I didn't know. I didn't mean it. Please don't do this." The groom listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. When she finished, he said something short and stepped back. She reached for him. He didn't take her hand. That was when my wife's mother moved. She crossed the room with purpose, heels sharp against the floor, and positioned herself between the bride and the groom like a shield. "This is enough," she said. "You've made your point." The groom looked at her calmly. "I didn't come here to make a point." She gestured toward me. "Then what was this?" He answered without hesitation. "A question." She scoffed. "You've humiliated this family." He shook his head. The truth did that. My wife stood beside me now, close enough that I could feel the tension radiating from her. "We can still fix this," she said. Not quite to me, not quite to herself. "Some things aren't fixed," I replied. "They're acknowledged." She looked at me, then really looked. And for the first time that night, her voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd stop." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to be careful with the truth. "I stopped," I said finally, "because continuing meant agreeing." She turned away. The groom's parents approached him quietly. They didn't speak at first. His mother touched his arm. His father nodded once. Whatever passed between them didn't need an audience. The groom walked toward the exits with them, pausing only once to look back at the room. Not at the decorations, not at the guests, at the bride. "I need honesty," he said calmly, "and tonight showed me we don't have it." Then he left. No announcement followed, no dramatic declaration, just absence. The band began packing their instruments. Guests followed slowly at first, then in clusters. The room emptied the way water drains steady, irreversible. My phone vibrated in my pocket. An authorization request queued for later that night. The last of the extras. I declined it. I felt nothing dramatic when I did. No thrill, no guilt, just finality. As the room thinned, my wife stood beside me in the quiet that remained. She opened her mouth to say something, an apology perhaps, or an explanation. But whatever it was, it didn't come. Some truths arrive too late for speech, and some consequences don't need to be loud to be complete. I didn't leave the venue right away, not because I wanted to stay, but because I wanted to see how things settled once there was nothing left to manage. No upgrades to approve, no conversations to smooth over, no expectations attached to my silence. The hall looked different without people in it. Chairs half pushed under tables, glasses abandoned with melted ice. The kind of aftermath you only see once the performance ends. My wife stood near the center of the room talking quietly with her mother. Their voices were low, urgent, not angry, strategic. I recognized that tone. It was the same one used every time something didn't go according to plan. I slipped out while they were still talking. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise to fill the space anymore. My thoughts moved slowly, deliberately, like they were finally allowed to take up room. That night, I slept on the couch, not as a punishment, not as a gesture, just because it felt like the right distance. Morning came early. I got dressed, made coffee, and left for work before anyone else woke up. The city was still half asleep, streets nearly empty, traffic lights changing for no one. I liked that hour. It felt honest. The building smelled like fresh coffee and disinfectant when I walked in. Familiar, neutral. A place where roles were clear and expectations were written down. I was halfway to my office when I heard my name. I turned. My wife stood in the lobby. Behind her were her daughter and her mother. They hadn't coordinated outfits, but they might as well have the same tight expressions, the same posture that said, "We're here to handle this." "This isn't the place," I said calmly. My wife crossed her arms. "You stopped answering your phone. I was working." Her mother stepped forward. "You embarrassed this family last night." I looked at her. I didn't speak into the microphone. That stopped her for half a second. "We need to talk," my wife said. Now I glanced around. A few co-workers had slowed their steps, curiosity tugging at their attention. I didn't raise my voice. "Yes," I said, "but not like this." I turned to the receptionist. "Could you ask HR to join us in security?" My wife stared at me. "Security witnesses," I replied. Her daughter scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I didn't argue. I walked toward the glass-walled conference room near the entrance, the one everyone could see into, the one with no corners. They followed. HR arrived first, then security. Calm, professional, prepared. We sat. My wife leaned forward immediately. "You need to fix what you broke." "I didn't break anything," I said. I stopped pretending. Her daughter slammed her hand on the table. "You ruined my wedding." HR shifted slightly in her chair. "Please lower your voice." The daughter huffed and leaned back, arms crossed. My wife tried again. "You could have waited. You could have talked to us privately." "I did," I said, "for years." Her mother waved a dismissive hand. "You're exaggerating." I didn't respond to that. Instead, I placed my phone on the table. "I want this documented," I said. My wife stiffened. Documented how accurately I didn't play recordings. I didn't need to. I opened my email and turned the screen toward HR. Invoices, contracts, payment confirmations, line after line under my name. I covered over $85,000 in upgrades, I said evenly. Over 8 months without acknowledgement, without discussion. HR's eyes moved quickly as she scanned the screen. My wife swallowed. We were going to tell you thank you. When I asked, no one answered. Her daughter laughed bitterly. You make it sound like we forced you. You didn't, I said. You assumed. Security shifted closer to the door, not threatening. Present. This isn't about the money, my wife said. It never is, I replied. Until it is. Her mother leaned forward. You married into this family. Responsibility comes with that. I met her gaze. Respect should have come with it too. Silence fell. HR cleared her throat. At this point, I'm going to ask that this conversation end. This is a workplace. Security stepped forward. We'll need you to leave. My wife stood slowly. This isn't over. I nodded. No, it's just no longer happening here. They left. The glass door closed behind them with a soft click. HR looked at me. Are you okay? I will be, I said. She nodded. If you need anything documented further, I'll let you know. The rest of the day passed quietly. Emails, meetings, small decisions, the kind of work that reminds you what stability feels like. That evening, I packed a single suitcase, not because I was running, because I was done negotiating my dignity. When I closed the door behind me, there was no sense of loss, only the absence of tension I'd mistaken for normal. For the first time in years, I wasn't on a stage, and I didn't miss it. I didn't leave in a rush. There was no slam door, no raised voices, no dramatic last look in the mirror. I waited until the house was quiet, until the tension that had lived in its walls for years finally felt tired enough to rest. I made coffee that morning, drank it slowly, let the routine ground me. Then I opened the drawer where we kept important papers. I wasn't searching for anything in particular. I think part of me already knew there would be something there, some final confirmation that what I'd felt for years wasn't imagination or oversensitivity. Inside the drawer was an envelope I didn't recognize. Loan statements, credit extensions, small at first, then larger, all under my name, all justified I could imagine as temporary solutions, all taken without a conversation. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let the truth settle. The wedding hadn't changed anything. It had just exposed what was already there. I took photos of the documents, not to threaten, not to retaliate, but to protect myself. Then I placed them back exactly where I'd found them. I wasn't there to confront. I was there to conclude. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer, not to start a war, to draw lines. Separate accounts, clear boundaries, written records. The language was calm, precise, adult. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. By the end of the meeting, my life felt smaller, but cleaner. That evening, I packed one suitcase, clothes, a notebook, the things that were undeniably mine. My wife stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely now, exhaustion softening her edges. You're really doing this, she said. Yes. She hesitated. I didn't think it would end like this. I met her eyes. I didn't think it would last like it did. She looked down, then back up. I should have stopped it. Yes, I said gently. You should have. She didn't argue. I left. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No dramatic messages, no public accusations, just the steady process of separation, paperwork, logistics, conversations that stayed civil because there was nothing left to fight over. One Saturday morning, I met an old friend for breakfast, someone I hadn't seen in years, not because we'd argued, but because I'd been busy holding other things together. "You look different," he said. "I feel lighter," I replied. He smiled. "That'll do it." Later that week, I got a message from the groom. I wanted to say thank you, not for speaking up, but for standing still. It gave me the courage to do the same. I read it twice. "You didn't owe me anything," I typed back. "You chose honesty." "That's harder than it looks," he replied. He was right. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly when you stop performing. Now, when I think back to that night, the laughter, the microphone, the moment the room turned, I don't feel anger. I feel clarity. Silence kept the system running. Boundaries shut it down. If you're listening to this and something in your chest tightened when the room laughed, you're not imagining it. That feeling has a name. It's the moment you realize you've been carrying more than your share. So let me ask you gently, if you were standing where I stood, would you stay quiet a little longer? Or would you step out of the spotlight altogether? Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this about quiet strength, hard choices, and the courage to stop performing, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We'll keep walking this path together.